He just opened the door and jumped in the car, and he had a gun. He just told me to shut up or he'd kill me. My babies were in the back seat and they were crying, and I tried to tell them everything was going to be okay.
Hey everyone, we have Cynthia Barnes Booker with us. Back in the day, she was a reporter at WSPA Channel 7. We called it News Channel 7, Cynthia, back then. Do you remember? And
Yes,
and this is an interesting time of the year because we are coming up on the anniversary of Susan Smith's crime, and we're also coming up on her first opportunity for parole. She was sentenced to 30 years to life. Her first chance to get out would come now in this coming year, and so she has an opportunity to file and do all those things. And so people are watching to see what happens with that in the context of 30 years since little Michael and Alex were drowned. So Cynthia, the most amazing thing is that you were the only journalist at her front door that night when the crime had happened. So you, like within hours of this taking place, you were talking to Susan Smith.
I know. Amy, when I think back to that night, almost 30 years ago, my videographer and I, Tommy Colonis, had just come back from Asheville, North Carolina, covering the story. So I'm the nightside reporter, working 3 to 11, right? So we finished doing the story. I'm in the newsroom. I'm ready to go home. And then a call came over the scanner that said 2 children in Union, South Carolina had been abducted. Well, I'm the nightside reporter. It's no going home. Tommy and I had to go cover that story. So we went to Union. We worked a double that day. So it was, just looking back, I know it was 30 years ago, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. Just the chaos and just everything that transpired over that period of time. And here we are to Susan Smith coming up for parole.
It is so hard to kind of wrap our minds around that, right? Because
Yeah.
I talked to the prosecutor in the case, and he was saying, Tommy Pope, how he, after the trial, after the sentencing, and when the jury did not give her the death penalty, they gave her this life, and with this 30-year opportunity for parole. But he says that the jurors afterwards said they didn't understand that she could get out. He wanted her to get the death penalty or at least be in jail for life. And now I guess South Carolina doesn't do life with chance for parole anymore. It's just life. And so it's very interesting, like what's going to happen with this and how the community feels about it. But she has recently gotten back in some trouble again behind bars and was convicted of a disciplinary infraction. So she's been talking on the phone to some filmmaker, and apparently money got deposited in her account. So that's a current situation. But I brought you in to talk back to that night because I know you were there right at the door talking to her. David was right by her side. I was rewatching the interview again today, and you were so nice about it. I remember your demeanor was so gentle with her because we all thought what she said had happened. And you were kind of, giving her an opportunity to tell what happened. And then she goes into this story with you.
When this whatever just told me to shut up or he'd kill me. So I just kept driving. My babies were in the back seat and they were crying, and I tried to tell them everything was going to be okay. And so we went on down the road, and he told me to stop, and it was just in the middle of the road, and he told me to get out, and I said, well, can I get my children? And he said no. He said I don't have time for that, and they were just crying.
We went in to interview Susan, and her husband at the time, Susan and David were standing inside sort of like a doorway leading to a hall. And I asked her, I said, would you like to talk and give a plea? And I remember Susan saying, well, what is that? I said, well, you just lost your kids. You said your kids were abducted. So don't you want to go on camera and say, whoever has my kids to turn them in? And so she decided to talk. But what I noticed that evening, she could not look me in the eye. She kept looking down. And after the interview, when Tommy and I got back in the car to head back to the station, I said to Tommy Ben, I said, I don't believe this story. I think she's lying. I don't believe it. And then, of
Wow.
course, 9 days later, we found out that it was a lie.
Yeah, and it kept unraveling, right? I mean, we had so many people that were talking about the things that started to not add up, like the red light that she supposedly had come and had the abduction take place. Well, it would never have turned to keep her there. It took another car to be there to have that happen. So that started to fall apart behind the scenes with investigators. We all didn't know that right away, but they knew that pretty quickly. And then the unraveling continued, and then there were lie detector tests, and we got reports that she was not passing those, and then the interrogation, and then the confession, but it was all over so much painstaking days, time, heartache. People were just so hoping for those little boys to be okay.
Yeah, and all the volunteers who went out looking for these kids, and the flyers that were up, and then the tips that came from all around the country, and we think we saw the car and remember the license plate of the car and all that. So all this time this is playing out, and the sheriff's the courthouse was a zoo, because people were there getting updates every day from the police, and everybody's wondering where are these kids. And then you have the fact that she said that this black man came and abducted her kids. So therein lies another twist to the story, because she made it seem like some black man took off with her kids when that wasn't the case. So just a bizarre time, just a lot of emotions,
And let's go back to your realization when you get in the car and you talk to Tommy and you're like, I don't believe her. I mean, that's remarkable, Cynthia, that you thought
So
that right then.
I think reporter instinct. And did I know that she had killed her kids? No, I didn't think that. But I just did not believe that story. And it was because I believe of the interaction. She couldn't look at me. She asked, well, what's that? What is a plea? So just a number of things. But as a journalist, my job was to do the interview,
Sure.
present the story, and let the viewers think whatever they wanted to think. And then again, 9 days later, the truth came out.
In this process of going back through everything, I talked to Tommy Pope, I mentioned the prosecutor, and he said he noticed on the tape, on the raw tape, before the lights, I guess they got the raw tape somehow, because he had some tape that showed before the light came on, David was looking completely distraught, upset, like just overwhelmed. And he said he could see her kind of giggling and being excited about being on television. That was Tommy Pope's take from watching the tape. So I thought that was real interesting.
That is interesting. I don't recall that, but what I do recall, speaking of David's reaction, I just remember when I was interviewing Susan Smith that night, he kept his head down like this the entire time, and he didn't look up. So what was going through his mind, I don't know, but she definitely didn't strike me as telling the truth. I didn't believe it one bit.
When you look back on this case, I think about really the two of us, right? We were both in our 20s. Is that right? Yeah, roughly.
I think so.
Let's not tell too many stories about our age, but we were young, but we were both starting our careers. And ultimately, I mean, I look back at my career thus far and think that really was the biggest story that we covered for the most part. I mean, there've been other big stories, but that was the story that people remember where they were when Howard Wells said she'd been arrested.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
And the gasp in the crowd. I mean, I've never seen a reaction like that because everyone was so invested. And you think about how different TV viewing was back then, where everybody watched the morning shows, everybody watched the news. It was appointment viewing. You know, there was no internet. And so we were all glued to finding out every day, tuning in at 6, tuning in the morning shows. All the networks were carrying it every morning about where were these little boys. It was so all-consuming.
It really was.
Like, I was still in the newsroom when you got back because I was so like worried about the kids. I was like, oh my gosh, like what has happened to these kids, you know? And I wasn't a mom yet, you know. I guess that next year I became a mom. And it's interesting because I wound up having with John Patterson to anchor the funeral for the little boys, which to this day, other than the Charleston AME church shooting, that funeral and the boys' funeral to me were the toughest job of anchoring I have ever had to do. And I don't know that I could have anchored that successfully if I was a parent already. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to handle it.
Yeah, I remember seeing David's reaction. He was overcome with just grief, unbelievable grief.
Yeah.
Just the look on his face and just knowing what had happened to his children and
such a betrayal.
Yeah, now I'm a parent and I have 2 sons, and I think about that from a different lens. It was terrible. You know, when I was a reporter and I didn't have kids, but now as a mom, just like you were saying, and another thing that strikes me, just thinking about, if I didn't say this already, just to say, being at that lake. I think about that a lot. Being at that lake, doing that interview with Sheriff Wells, and talking about where are these kids? What information do you have? And they're in the lake, and
right behind you,
right behind me. And I did not talk to the divers, but I did hear that it was very upsetting to the divers when they found Michael and Alex, and just the condition of their little bodies. So it's just
heart-wrenching. Well, let's catch people up on you, because you obviously were an Emmy Award-winning reporter for us, and you went on with your career beyond Channel 7. So let's catch up on what you did after us, and then also the kind of new chapter you're in.
So after I left South Carolina, I went on to Buffalo, New York, and then I came to Northeast Ohio. And I was in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio. I actually did a big story here where I followed a nonprofit group to sub-Saharan Africa, and did a story on that group taking toiletries, medical supplies to some of the hardest hit areas of people having AIDS. And so that was in the 90s. So I did that story and won an Emmy for that.
Another Emmy. Great.
Yeah, won an Emmy for that. So the Susan Smith story was my first Emmy. And then the story on the local group going to Africa, it was called Mission of Hope. That was my second. I love that. Mm-hmm. That was my second Emmy.
That is so great. And now you're an educator these days?
So now I'm an educator. I teach students, high school students, how to do media, broadcasting, journalism. We get into some filmmaking techniques. So now I'm in education. So I'm teaching other teaching students to do what I used to do and then some.
Yeah. And it is so different now. And I know you're knowing that by having to prepare them for all that there is now. I mean, all these platforms and ability to do it yourself and like create content all the time. It's really an exciting time in journalism and in media in general.
It is, because when I started out in the media, of course, many years ago, 3/4 inch tape and then graduated to beta tape. And
Yep.
people were like, what is she talking about?
Yes.
And then, gradually, here we are now with, social media and just, and so when the news happened, when we were in the business, you had to wait until the 6 o'clock news. Well, not now. You can just post it right away. So yeah, it is different. And I even tell my students that I can teach you old school, but hey, I'm learning a lot from new school too, and they teach me a lot as well. Yeah, they teach me a lot as well.
I love it. I love trying to stay up to date with things. And that's what you're doing as an educator. That's what I'm doing as an older journalist, a seasoned, shall we say, journalist.
I say seasoned and marinate.
Marinated. I've been marinating a long time. I'm so glad to catch up with you. And I know, you're still a journalist at heart, and we don't really share opinion. And I don't know what your thoughts are on Susan Smith, whether she should or shouldn't. But I am curious, since you are a journalist and you have some experience in the world of these kinds of things, do you think she'll get parole? What do you think?
I think it's going to be very interesting how it's going to play out. I'll be watching and I'll be listening, and we'll all find out what the answer will be.
Yes, we will. I do think that she has diminished her chances somewhat by virtue of having this late breaking development right before the parole. Because apparently she'd had some disciplinary issues early on in her prison time, but in recent years had not had problems until suddenly this sort of thing.
I saw that. So pretty much for 10 years, I think a story I read, things have been, pretty good. There have been some infractions that have happened behind bars, but this most recent one with talking to the filmmaker, I think only inmates can only write letters. It was something like that.
Yeah, no phone calls. Yeah, no phone interviews. Yeah.
So that was a violation of the rule. So how that will affect the parole hearing remains to be seen.
We shall see. Cynthia Barnes, that's how I called you back in the day, but you went on and got married. So Cynthia Barnes Booker, you are an amazing talent, and I just am so glad we got to catch up. We actually got to visit in person back in February. You came to the area, and that's when we kind of were all like, oh my gosh, 30 years is coming. Like, we're going to have to chit chat.
I know. I'm so glad that we were able to see each other back then with a lot of other friends. I
know. So many of the old school. Yes. All the OG journalists of the upstate. Yes. Yeah, it was
brought
great.
Us together. Liz brought us together. Yeah.
She did. Liz is the best. Well, listen, God bless. Take care in your work. Create some lovely new journalists. We need the next crop to come on down, because we are always looking for good, talented young people, for sure.
Thank you, Amy. Take care.
Okay, really, thanks, Cynthia.